The Xtalks Life Science Podcast is your source for all things pharma, biotech, medtech, healthcare, research, and more.
Hello and welcome to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. I'm Ayesha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at Xtalks.com, and this week I am so happy to introduce our special guest on the show. With us we have Dr. Michelle Hoffmann, who is the Executive Director of the Chicago Biomedical Consortium, or the CBC, which is a consortium of biomedical researchers across Northwestern University, the University of Illinois at Chicago, and the University of Chicago that is supported by the Searle Funds at the Chicago Community Trust. The CBC's mission is to stimulate collaboration among scientists to accelerate discovery that will transform biomedical research and improve the health of humankind. At the CBC, Dr. Hoffmann is reshaping the organization to train local PhD talent in early-stage commercialization and fund high-potential biopharma innovations from Chicago's universities. Previously, she served as Senior Vice President of Deep Tech at P33 and spent 15 years helping life sciences companies grow as a Senior Vice President at Back Bay Life Sciences Advisors, where she worked on major transactions including platform and asset deals with Gilead and AbbVie. Dr. Hoffmann has a PhD in molecular and cellular biology from the University of California, Berkeley, and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Brandeis University. To learn more about the work that Dr. Hoffmann is leading at the CBC, let's turn to her now. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
I want to thank you for having me. It's really my pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you so much, and really looking forward to the conversation. You've led the Chicago Biomedical Consortium, the CBC, since 2021. And I'd firstly like to learn a bit more about your background and the journey in the fields of life sciences strategy, biopharma, biotech ecosystem development, and commercialization, and what ultimately drew you to the CBC.
Yeah, so I think me running the CBC is a culmination of all of my adult life experiences. So first and foremost being a scientist by training, then moving on to what I call strategic advisory. So after I completed my postdoc, I went into strategic advisory. I like to say it's the intersection of finance and R&D. What would a new therapy cost to develop? For what reason? Who would acquire it? Who would finance it? And what you need from a scientific and clinical perspective to get to those points. I did that for a very long time. And then in 2019, for a number of reasons. So I really started my career in Boston. I ended up in Chicago because of my husband, who took a job at the University of Chicago. I kept my job in Boston for 7 years. I flew back and forth because there really wasn't that much biotech here to speak of. And then in 2019, I was recruited by Brad Henderson, who's the CEO of an economic development organization called P33, which was actually started by Penny Pritzker. And its mission was to develop a innovation ecosystem in Chicago and actually in Illinois. So even though I say Chicago Biomedical Consortium, I really think a lot about Illinois that would rival the coasts. And I was brought on to think about deep tech, which is really business models that rely on university-generated IP like quantum and life sciences. I did that for a few years, starting in 2019. I stopped flying back and forth to Boston. A lot of people think that I moved to Chicago in 2019. I moved to Chicago in 2012. But in 2019, started thinking about how we could develop more deep tech for Illinois. Like I said, I worked in all kinds of areas, including quantum information science and technology, but I am a life scientist by training and by heart. And so when the opening of the Chicago Biomedical Consortium came about in cooperation with P33, which really still thinks about economic development for the region, I went over to lead the CBC. So I brought my time in biotech, my training as a scientist, and economic development to that position. I was hired because the organization wanted to move in a direction where it wasn't just about promoting collaboration between scientists, but actually developing their great research into applications, businesses, and jobs that would benefit Illinois. And so they picked me for the position because of all of the various perspectives that I could bring. Understanding how a university works, how biotech works, and how economic development works.
That's fantastic. And I think really we hear a lot about transitioning from academia to industry and a lot of people not being prepared for that transition. You may have a couple of places. Stanford comes to mind, perhaps, where they do have those kinds of more collaborative environments and ecosystems. And so I think this is such a wonderful and important initiative to really bridge those gaps between academia and industry. And of course, you're reshaping the CBC to really focus on training local PhD talent, which is, again, really critical if people are looking to transition into industry or just to form bridges between academia and industry, as I said.
Yeah. So if I may, let me just make sure that I'm very clear, right? So there's industry and then there's building biotech. And what I'm here for, and industry is great, but when I think of industry, I think of large companies like Pfizer, Genentech, or Amgen. And obviously we would love company to grow to be that size. But what I think a lot about is the fact that we have great research at our universities. It leaves the state all the time when it is time to be developed and to build a company and really get the economic value of those discoveries. What we see a lot of is, or what we saw a lot of, I think when I was first starting, is that because we didn't have the space, the capital, and the operators to develop these research projects into applications and businesses, that they would have to move to a biohub on the coast, so like Boston or San Francisco. And our goal was to say, let's build the infrastructure and the capabilities to do that here. So you've referred to us training local talent. The way that we think about it, so I started working in Boston after my postdoc in about 2004. There really wasn't a lot of biotech there to speak of. What I saw during my career trajectory there is that the companies that came about and that ended up being successful, a lot of times what you had was an apprenticeship model where a young scientist would work with a more tenured biotech executive, really learning the ins and outs of the field, because it's not just science, right? There's so many different things that have to happen in order to turn a research project into a drug that you really can't learn that in a class, and you can't learn that in a program. You must be apprenticed. And it's one of the reasons why, if you are a young person getting their PhD, you'll move to Boston or you'll move to San Francisco. What we said is, why can't we create some of the infrastructure here, keep these PhDs here, and train them how to do this? Now, granted, we're not training them in a company like Genzyme or Millennium, but we are training them on some of the nuts and bolts so that if they go try their hands, build companies here, and then, they get to a certain level, like we hope they go all the way, but statistically it's unlikely, they will know enough to start again and to also train the people in their environment. So it's really a virtuous flywheel of apprenticed life sciences operators. That's how we think about it.
I love that, because you have that in so many other fields. And I know that going through as graduate school myself, a lot of us wished there were more opportunities like that for that kind of apprenticeship. I think you're thrown into a postdoc sometimes if you're going the academic route, or if you go into biotech or industry, there's nothing really there. But yeah, sounds absolutely amazing and a very important need indeed. And so can you tell us a bit more about CBC's process for identifying and funding promising biopharma applications coming out of Chicago's universities? What criteria matter most?
Yeah, so really what we're looking for is a few things. We are a nonprofit. Our goal is twofold. First, the fact that there is a broken pipeline between university discovery and actual real-world applications in life sciences. There are many reasons for why that is. But one of the fundamental reasons is that university scientists do not make what industry is looking for. It's just very different standards and different incentives. So the second thing is that university scientists don't know what is investable, right? So a lot of times you're working on something, but it is not in fact investable given the way that healthcare is delivered. And so we're looking for those two things, right? Something that is investable, be it a platform or a particular type of therapeutic. And we're looking for something where the science and what has been done has been de-risked enough that we could at least consider that we could put this on the route to industry robustness, right? And what that means is that you have a validated target. You have repeated the major assays. You have a therapeutic that has some affinity or potency for the target. There are so many things that industry is looking for that there just isn't the money or even the expertise within academia to do. That's really what we are looking for. And then we also do, so because of my time at Back Bay, my time as a strategic advisor, we also look at everything else from the commercial opportunity to transaction risk, to manufacturability, to regulatory potentials, to can we design a clinical trial? What are the endpoints? And we're talking at the very earliest stages of science. So we will do an incredibly rigorous review. A lot of times it is to educate the faculty on what is translatable and what is not.
And in terms of Chicago has a growing life sciences footprint, and you're at the center of that, obviously with the CBC. And so from your perspective, what unique strengths or gaps define the region's innovation ecosystem right now, and what are you hoping to fill?
Yeah, so the question is, what are our assets and what are our gaps? I mean, clearly, I would say, and like I said, I say Chicago and I really think about Illinois, but honestly, I also think about the Midwest. We have world-class universities and a considerable amount of innovation across a broad swath of geography that's not really being mined as efficiently as it could because of the vast amounts of geography. So first and foremost, we have world-class research institutions. We have a legacy of engineering excellence. So we build things, right? That is true of the Midwest, but it is also true of Chicago and Illinois. We have, we are great in computing. We are great in synthetic biology. We make new proteins. We make new capsids. We make new cells. We make new nanomaterials, right? So like we make some weird things and we're very creative about how we do that. The other thing that we have, like I said, we're very good at computing. And from my time at P33, and if you look at the news that's coming out of Illinois, we're actually really winning the race in quantum computing as well as quantum sensing. So that's another thing that we have going for us. And then we also have a legacy of healthcare delivery, right? So we have world-class hospitals. We are a place where healthcare delivery has been studied and innovated so that we have really this legacy of pushing those boundaries. In terms of the gaps, I think it's like, honestly, in between the coasts, you do have a lot of gaps in the country in terms of experienced operators, which is something we're trying to fill. There was a time where we didn't even have the lab space to build companies. And now we do, thanks to many different groups, including Fulton Labs and Portal Innovations. And now we have Hyde Park Labs and the incubation labs at Northwestern. And then again, it's really that dearth of expertise and know-how. And as a result, we don't have the scaling capital that other regions do for life sciences and biotech. But I believe that capital will follow the expertise.
And you've touched on your roles at P33 and Back Bay Life Science Advisors. And so how have those experiences, again, in strategy, investment, deep tech, shaped the way you approach your work today and the initiatives today at the CBC?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that fundamentally, and this is one of the reasons why the CBC is continuing to grow and evolve, I think the issue is we have all of these great scientists working on discovery in these universities. And at the same time, we have an industry that's looking for more and more life sciences and biotech innovation. There has to be something in the middle, right? So there has to be something where you think about how to de-risk the science, right? Like, so in the university, you're all about discovery. I want to discover new things. When you go into industry, you have to prove that the thing that you discovered works under so many different conditions, right? Enough conditions that you can get through an FDA regulated process, that you're confident that you can put this in a human, and that as you go through human clinical trials, it will actually meet the metrics that you've designated. So what happens is that at these very earliest stages, you can get venture groups like Atlas or Venrock or Third Rock that will come and they'll take a very early stage science idea and they will kick the tires on it, right? So they'll go into stealth, they'll reproduce all the science, they'll figure out whether there's an appetite in industry. So they'll do a market test among their friends. And they will also try and put together a management team, all the while making sure that they're kicking the tires in the science and it's reproducible. They can only do that for a few things. And if you are too early, right, their own investors don't have the timeline to wait for something that early. And at the same time, in order to move something from the university to the place where you think that it can go into that biotech industry funnel, you need the same rigor and frameworks that those venture groups or industry would bring, but you need it with patient capital. And so that's really what we are trying to do. What I think the very innovative idea that we have is at a nonprofit level to bring the same industry and venture frameworks that you would have at later stages, but bring them to academia, funded because we are funded by philanthropy, as well as to some degree the federal government. We can take that very patient capital, bring that expertise, and start to professionalize scientific discoveries in a way that they'll meet the tests that they need to go into that industry and biotech funnel.
And so when you speak about bringing discoveries or shaping discoveries from academia and bringing them into a real world setting where they have potential to be commercialized and marketed, how does the CBC collaborate with local universities to ensure that that promising science doesn't get trapped in the academic pipeline?
Right. Well, so our natural resource is the professors at our universities. The CBC does nothing without them, right? So we work very, very closely with professors at universities that think that they might have a discovery that could translate. We help them evaluate it. We help them evaluate it. If it meets certain criteria, we will fund it. And we will build a development plan. If it meets the milestones in that development plan, our goal now is to start to form a company together and actually get that discovery into a data package that a VC or industry would be confident in investing in. And what that means is it has to hit certain industry grade benchmarks. So again, we don't expect professors to do that, right? That's not their day job. It's not what they're trained on. And it requires a whole team of people that we'll bring in from our network to make sure that that development plan is robust and industry grade. We will work with the professors. We'll also work with the universities. The goal is to set up the company and potentially license the technology as needed so that we can continue to do the experiments in a way that will build an investor grade data package.
And what do you see as the biggest barriers or hurdles in preventing more Chicago or Illinois, as you said, based biotech startups from scaling, from really going from that idea at the bench and hitting the market?
So, and I say this as bringing some of my expertise in there, right? Universities move forward because of individual professors. Each professor has their own research group and they are experts at that research. And that is great for pushing the frontiers of what is known and what is knowable. However, when you are taking something that you've discovered and now you are trying to turn it into an application, it becomes more of an engineering project, right? So you're not trying to discover new things. You're trying to take something that you've discovered and build that into an application. That requires a much more team-based approach, right? There's no one person that knows how to do this. And so what we try to bridge is first off, the project management. So you need somebody who's quarterbacking this entire thing. And that's something that we train our junior operators on how to do. And then you have to know when to bring in the right team members at the right time. Somebody that understands medicinal chemistry, somebody that understands formulation, somebody that understands regulatory, somebody that understands the animal models, right? And I'm saying very specific for that drug and that specific indication or disease that you are trying to develop it in. And so what you need there is a much more team-based approach. That is not something that is easy to do in universities. I want to be very clear. Universities are collaborative and promote collaboration across universities and across departments all the time. The issue is that they sort of portion it off and they say, you do your thing and I'll do my thing and we'll come together and it will work. But that's just not how you do an engineering project. You need a project manager that says, you do this by this timeline so that that person can do that. And it has to be a little bit more hierarchical and it has to be more milestone driven. And that's really what I think is the missing link when academia tries to translate and commercialize inventions.
And you also mentioned from the investors' side of things, from their perspective, funders and investors, what makes a university-originated biopharma technology really stand out? What are the kinds of things that they're looking for and, that they can see potential in?
So these aren't my numbers. These numbers are published by multiple places, but 2/3 of university research does not repeat in industry hands. And so VC understand that when they are looking at very early stage stuff, a lot of and when I say 2/3, I mean whether it's published, whether they license it, right? That is not because people are doing bad science. I mean, in some cases, sure. But it is because the standards that we have for discovery and novelty are very different than the standards we have when we are trying to build an application that people need to ingest and needs to be regulated by FDA. And so what will make something stand out is a data package where they can see that things have been repeated outside of the lab, that the experiments that they would expect to be done before they submit an IND or do IND enabling experiments, that those are all done to the grade and to the specificity that they themselves would do. That means the right models, not using the model that industry thinks is useful, making sure that you're using a benchmark. I can't tell you how many times we have professors come to us and they're like, well, this works in this type of cancer. And we're like, but does it work better than the market leader or the one that, people are very excited about right now in clinical trials? And they're like, no, it just works in cancer, right? So does it work better than the industry standard? Do you have a benchmark? Are you using the type of milestones that industry would say are applicable. So if you have something that you say is a lead drug, right? Does it have the right potency? Does it have the right safety? Does it have the right permeability? What are its characteristics in terms of, how it goes into an animal and its physiology? So these are all the things that they would want to check off when they are thinking about investing in a potential drug package. And so we want to make sure that we build that package that they want to see, and that also all of the data or not all the data, but much of the data has been validated in a second site.
And finally, looking ahead, what are your priorities for strengthening Chicago, Illinois' position as a competitive, inclusive bioinnovation hub over the next couple of years, 5, 10 years, and beyond?
So we think that there's been a retraction in the biotech market. It's very cyclical, right? But there's a lot of capital in the market between 2019 and 2022, and that has retracted. And people said we spent a lot of money on things that we haven't really gotten a return from. I think that what we want to demonstrate is that we can take very novel innovation that's coming out of Midwestern universities. We can apply capital in a very efficient way. And we can actually develop those innovations in a way that will feed the need that industry and biotech VC have, but do it in a way that's capital efficient as well as to their satisfaction. I think showing that we can do this in the Midwest in a non-bio hub or non-biotech hub will be absolutely paramount, but I'm convinced that we can do it. And I think it will be the gateway to opening up Midwestern innovation for development and investment.
It's absolutely fantastic. And Dr. Hoffmann, I just want to thank you once again, not only for your time here with us and sharing all of the important work that you're doing, but really the important work that you're leading at the CBC. Just absolutely tremendous. So I'd like to thank you once again for sharing all of the great work that you're helping lead at the CBC. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, that's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week. Bye for now.
Visit xtalks.com to join the life science community and unlock exclusive access to editorial content, webinars, networking opportunities, and more. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers sharing them and should not be taken as professional advice, nor do they necessarily reflect the policies or positions of Honeycomb Worldwide. For more information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com.